Good evening, everyone. I won't say afternoon, but it's evening. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Burke County Board of Commissioners regular meeting for Tuesday, August the 20th, 2019. At this time, if you have telephones with you or any kind of devices, please check those and put those on silent for us. We would appreciate that so very much. If you're a speaker tonight, be sure when you come up to the podium or the table that you activate the little red light on top so that we can make a good recording of the activities for tonight. Pastor Ed Stevenson is not here tonight, so we're going to ask Brother Pete Mentor if he will step forward and give us our invocation. Then after Pete does the invocation, our students from Forest Hill Elementary, where Nikki Costello is the principal, they'll be coming up and doing our Pledge of Allegiance. So if you'll stand with me for the invocation and the pledge. Peter?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you're so inclined, please pray with me. Dear, kind, and gracious Heavenly Father, we're so thankful to be before you tonight in this public hearing, public meeting, where the citizens of Burke County can come and be heard in front of their county leaders, dear Lord. Please bless this meeting. Please bless these commissioners and the people that are here tonight to present. Lord, let your hand be upon the leaders to guide this county in the proper direction as they have been doing all along, Lord. Just let that direction be in your will. And please guide this meeting tonight. And we ask these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, guys, if y'all will stay right there, we're going to come down and take a picture with you. How about that? And then we'll put you up on the wall later on. All right, parents, if you're going to take a picture, jump on up here. Get close up, okay? Get real close. Chairman. Miss Britton over there pretty tall. Be sure you hit him. Okay? All right, again. Got one more. Got one more. Okay, stand still. All right, let's give these. All right, gentlemen, this moves us forward to our agenda, which you've had in your hands for several days. At this time, we'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
All right, you've heard Commissioner Abley's motion. All in favor signify by raising the right hand. Madam Clerk, that'll be 5-0. Thank you, Wayne. Moving on to approval of minutes, we have two sets of minutes. The first set is from April the 2nd, 2019, our pre-agenda meeting, and April the 16th of 2019, our regular meeting. So we'll entertain a motion on those two sets of minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I so move that we approve both meetings.
All right, we've heard Maynard's motion. All in favor signify by raising of the right hand. 5-0, Madam Clerk. Thank you so very much. Moving on to item number 6, there are presentations, and we have no presentations for tonight, so we'll move on to item number 7, our schedule of public hearings. Our first public hearing is from Community Development and Zoning Map Amendment, ZMA 2019-05, and public hearing, and that will be presented by Pete Minner from Planning and Zoning. Peter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Board. Hope you don't mind me sitting down here. My notebook takes up quite a bit of room. Okay. First thing I'd like to make mention of, Board, is there was a couple nice couple that came in to meet with me this day, and we went over the proposed rezoning. It involved 2 of their properties. Sorry. The rezoning involves 2 of their properties, and they wanted to know the pros and cons of the rezoning, proposed rezoning. And after discussing that, they asked if we would make a recommendation to change their rezoning from the R1 district to the conservation district low density. And just for the record, I'd like to mention those 2 parcel ID numbers so that they can be on the record. As I give my presentation, it'll just be generalized, so I want to make mention of these parcel ID numbers now so that they can be reflected in any change that y'all might make for this. The first parcel is parcel ID number 17548959990. It's a 0.59 acre parcel of land. It's currently zoned PRMU-CD. The proposed zoning was going to be R1. They wish to have that property rezoned to the low-density conservation district. And the second parcel is across the street directly. It's represented by parcel number 175580547. It's a 25.54 acre parcel of land. It was presently rezoned PRMU. The proposed rezoning would have been R1, and the property owners wish to request that that be changed to the low-density conservation district as well. So I just want to make mention of that in those 2 parcels. So I'm going to begin with ZMA 2019-05, and that rezoning has that first parcel that I mentioned, just to make note of that. So give you a little background on why this rezoning is before you tonight. In 2004, a lot of the land around the lake was owned by Crescent Resources, Crescent Communities, and at that time they came before the board back in 2004 and petitioned the county to rezone. It was about 1,100 acres, a little over 1,100 acres of land, to a specific zoning district, which would be the planned residential mixed-use conditional district. At that same time, they also presented a development plan for how those parcels would be developed. And each parcel was to be developed a certain way, certain amount of homes and lots, and some other types of non-residential uses were discussed as well. Well, in order for that to take place, public water and public sewer would have to be brought to these parcels. And in order to do that, there had to be an extension of those lines, which are currently the sewer line runs to the South Point community to the south of this map here, and the water line actually runs a little bit further up to the Methodist Church. In order for these parcels to be developed in the way that plan proposed, both public water and public sewer would have to be run all the way up. And as you know, the county adopted that rezoning and plan, and in that plan and ordinance, there was a 2-year vesting period in which time the development of the parcels were supposed to be initiated. If those parcels were not initiated for development within that 2-year period of time, then the county by ordinance is supposed to take action to rezone the property back to a general zoning district and remove that development plan which Crescent Community submitted. Well, at this time, there was some development of the land to the south, in Dry Creek community, which is a part of South Point. Well, about that time that development was underway or wrapping up, we had the recession of 2008 through 2012, as you know, and development sort of ceased at that time for Crescent communities regarding these parcels here. So the 2-year vesting period was to elapse, and so Crescent had come back to the board on several 2-year increments to ask for extensions of the rezoning and that development plan. That final vesting period or extension period elapsed in 2014. And as you know, Crescent Resources has since sold their land holdings in Burke County and has essentially left the county as far as land development is concerned. So this brings up a predicament here with other owners, multiple owners, taking ownership of these parcels. The ability to develop those parcels in the way that the development plan calls for is essentially not going to happen. In order to develop, that public water and sewer would have to be run up there. And to follow ordinance, staff is bringing forth this rezoning as required when that extension period ended, and is now asking to rezone these parcels, which you see before you there, from the planned residential mixed use conditional district to the low density conservation district. And that's the rezoning before you here tonight. If you're wondering what that difference would mean, is that where that planned residential mixed use development plan would have allowed for over 1,000 parcels and dwellings on those lands at as low as half-acre lots. The significant change there would be that this would be a conservation district, which would be put in place to protect the lake by increasing the overall density to 3.5 acres per dwelling. We felt that would be appropriate for this area, and especially the waterfront properties here. in order to further protect the water quality of Lake James and also to protect the scenic beauty of the lake as well. 1,000 parcels, 1,000 homes on that land would significantly change the look of it, I believe. And so that's the basis behind this proposed rezoning tonight.
Thank you, Pete. Questions or comments for Peter at this time, gentlemen?
Mr. Chairman, Pete, excuse me, let me turn the mic on. Some of the things in here that just kind of creates a question. I told you I didn't think I had many more questions after our pre-agenda meeting. But there's a statement in here that that Duke Power Crescent, whichever name you want to use on it, was no longer interested or was going to develop this property. Is that the understanding that we have? And
Yeah,
what is the combined value of the acreage that we're talking about in these zonings? Would you have a guess at that?
I would not, unfortunately. To answer your first question, Crescent Communities has sold all their land holdings off to several entities. One in particular is a company out of Colorado, Caldwell Land and Timber. They bought the majority of Crescent's land holdings. There was some other land holdings as well that was sold individually. Primarily when we're talking about these properties here, there's about 4 or 5 different landowners involved in this. There's several management companies. Duke Energy owns property above there, but some management companies. There's one private owner that owns some. The couple that came in today, they own that 0.59 acre property, and Linville Methodist Church also owns a 2.49 acre parcel involved in this, but the majority of the land is owned by a management company.
Yeah, I understand. I think my point and where I'm having trouble understanding, regardless who owns it or who bought it to develop, you know, obviously they did that to get their money back at some point. So if Duke doesn't own it and some entity does, why wouldn't they be developing that property? It's such prestige property and,
Yes.
yeah, I mean, it's just, it kind of blows your mind that, you know, people are not coming forth and buying that property or building a house on because it's such a hot commodity.
Right, and thankfully for Burke County, the person that bought the majority of that property in their management company, they're conservation minded as well, and they may be wanting to speak to the board tonight since they are a principal landowner here, but they're conservation minded. They have actually, I believe, from what I understand, have approached Foothills Conservancy and state parks to try to acquire this property. The deal, evidently, from what I understand, didn't go through, but they are conservation minded, and they feel that they would like to conserve this land as well, and not so much develop it, but to conserve it.
And these property owners or entities are thinking that rezoning that will help them move the property, sell it?
Actually, the property owner is not in total favor of the rezoning, to my knowledge. They want to conserve it, but maybe in a different way. They may have their own plan to work towards conservation, but staff, has to act on what the ordinance says to do. And the ordinance says if the land is not initiated into development within a certain period of time, that we are supposed to move forward with rezoning it to a general zoning district that would be appropriate for that area. And so that's why we're here.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments for Pete? All right, hearing none, at this time, Madam Clerk, I'll open the public hearing. If there's anyone here to speak to ZMA 2019-05, if you will come forward to the podium. If you would, please state your name and your address.
Good evening. I'm Sina McJimsey Reed. My address is 13011 Augusta Court, Fort Mill, South Carolina. And I first want to thank staff and others with whom we have been in contact today for your wonderful hospitality. Very grateful for that. I am here to share a vision and to make a request. And the vision is that one that came to us in the form of a seed many years ago. And through people whom I did not have personal contact and didn't see. But it was through the stories that were told. I grew up on the Yellow Mountain Road. I graduated from high school here in 1961, so my roots are deep. I have been away since 1961, living in other places, but have returned to visit frequently. And what we are proposing, we being my sons and their families, is what we call a Fonta Flora for the next millennium. The land that we possess is not anywhere near Fonta Flora was. But what we've come to learn is that the one person that we know was buried on the mound in Lake James happens to be the father of James Connolly, who owned the property that we now possess. And so we would like to pass on those stories to the next generations that we learned growing up as children. The stories of togetherness and love. And we're calling that wellness for the journey. It would be a permaculture, and I don't know whether or not you're familiar with that, development. A mixed use would have been perfect for us, but since we understand that it's going away, we would have to opt for the next option. And residential just will not fit with our design. If you know what a permaculture is, there's farming, there are animals, we're looking for a cultural center where we can, the community can come in and congregate and share stories. We are looking for a wellness center, instructional classes, reflecting pools, places that you can meditate, gardens. You may not appreciate this, but tree hugging, where you walk through forestry area and get an appreciation for life. And it has three basic premises for this development. We will care for the earth, we will care for people, and we will reinvest the abundance. So my request is, since mixed use is going away, which would have been the perfect kind of zoning for us, because there will be residential, it will be a stable residential, but the design will fit perfectly with what you are anticipating to happen in that Lake James Trail Park area. It's holistic, it's clean, and it will abound with fun. So my specific request is that you rezone, see, my husband told me to have this before me, but it was too much like doing it correctly. That we would like to request that the commissioners amend the proposed rezoning of property PIN number 175580547 and PIN number 17548959990 from Residential 1 District to the Low Density Conservation District, since mixed use is not an option. Because of the design that we have just would not work for Residential 1. I thank you for your consideration of this request, and I can answer any questions about the vision that you might have.
Anybody have any questions at this time?
Can you point those areas out on the map?
Yes, I think I can. It's this one and it's this one. Am I correct? This property goes up almost directly in front of South Point. And this is actually on the lake side. This is 126 here.
And total acreage?
You're gonna have to come back to my microphone for me, because I gotta get you on record.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
If I may help out here.
Thank you.
The small sliver down below is the 0.59 acre parcel that I mentioned earlier. And in forthcoming rezoning, which we'll get into, that would be the, whoa, did I do that? Put that down. That would be the 25.54 acre parcel of land just above it.
Thank you.
And according to your opening statements, y'all are already in agreement with this? Was that one of the?
Yes, we've discussed this kind of at length and looked at her vision plan, and we believe that everything that she's wishing to accomplish can be accomplished with that low-density conservation, where the R1, it wouldn't work too well.
Thank you.
Thanks, ma'am. All right, the public hearing is still open. Is there anyone else that'd like to speak to 201907? Come forward, sir, and state your name and address for us, please.
Let's see.
My name is Lee. Go back, so you can press it one more time.
Okay, sorry. My name is Lee Zenzo. My address is Winston-Salem, 701 Lancashire Drive, Winston-Salem, Lancashire Road, sorry. Winston-Salem, North Carolina, 27106. I am the person to whom Pete was referring. That is I manage a LLC, which is owned by several trusts, and I've redirected assets toward the purchase of most of the land up here. Let's see if I can have a laser pointer, maybe that will.
Oh, careful.
Oops.
Maybe you do better than I did.
Let's see. I'll try to work this thing. Oops, oh. Sorry. Oops.
Let's see. Let me try to help out.
Can you get the laser?
That red button
Red
right
button.
there. See it in the center? That red one right there. Just
Oh,
below.
okay. All right. All right. Well, okay, on this, it's easier here, 2 and 3. East Lake 2 and East Lake 3. So I guess that's probably the easiest way to do this. I don't remember the zoning numbers, but I wrote a letter to the commissioners, which I think indicates all the affected numbers. It's everything except that church that was on the 2.49 acres is not part of what I'm speaking to. That was land I donated to the church recently. For starters, let me just introduce myself. Let's see, how do I operate that?
What do you need to do?
Next slide.
That one?
Yeah,
Okay.
okay.
So the arrows.
I thought it would be useful for the commissioners to know my involvement with East Lake 2 and 3. I got in by accident when I learned several years ago about the attempt by Crescent to increase the slope so that they could put more lots on it. And I was of the understanding that this was a minor variance, but that's when I learned that it could have up to 1,000 acres on this property. So that's what drew my concern, because I'm the conservationist type that Pete was referring to. But originally I purchased 5 lots in East Lake 3 off of South Point Drive, which was then part of East Lake 3, but then they incorporated that into Dry Creek. But that's not part of what we're speaking to today, but it's part of East Lake 3. In 2013 to 2014, then I argued against some of the requirements that they were trying to change with respect to making it easier to develop the property, East Lake 2 and 3, which consists of, let's see, I think it's 228 acres is East Lake 2. And at this point, having pulled out the property that I already purchased in Dry Creek, I think that left 170 some acres. And what I did at that point was to acquire all of this property and sell off, in the course of that acquisition, 72 acres to the property now known as Heron Point, with one of the caveats being that they would only put up 4 dwelling units in that 72 acres. So my goal has been basically to keep things low density from the start, and it was distressing to me, as it is to Pete and others, that it's potentially possible to put up 1,000 acres, 1,000 lots rather. So what I was trying to do is preserve it from that, and I approved the Fauna Flora Trail easement also. I know that came up in the preliminary hearing as to how that came about, but in the course of my acquiring East Lake 2 and 3 on behalf of the LLC, which was closed in January of 2016, but in December, right before that, I jointly with the party that purchased the 72 acres that I just referred to, we granted the 100-foot wide easement on the Fauna Flora Trail so that that would be able to run through the property and allowed to be pulled away from the highway. So I've been involved in various aspects of this property. I donated to the state parks at that point the right to use the property and to give them an option to purchase the property for a 3-year period of time. So that is why it hasn't been developed, because the state park was given the right to purchase it for parks. And so that's why it wasn't renewed in terms of the 2014 Crescent effort that they came by every 2 years and renewed these development rights. But given that the expectation from 2016 forward was to not donate, but to enable the state parks to acquire this property, it didn't seem necessary to do that. And then once that happened, it became a challenge to even donate that 2.5 acres to the church across the street, because the state had a right to the purchase of the East Lake 2 and 3. But I've been involved continuously since 2013 in this effort, And also in other areas, I actively got involved with the state legislature attempted to eliminate the buffers on the lake, and I saw that as being something worth getting actively involved with. And then there was an effort by the National Wildlife Commission to put a shooting range at the other end of the lake, and I felt like that could be done in an area which would be less audible, let's say, to the people on the lake. So I've been involved in various efforts to protect the lake. Now the option agreement that I signed with Foothills in an effort to move the lake to Foothills, who was then going to move it to the state parks, I put some restrictions on it, and the state parks personnel were very happy to do this, at the time at least. And so in addition to preserving the land, I wanted certain things, like I didn't want trailer parks, and I didn't want to see a public dock on it because we've got a public dock close by. What I was trying to pursue is a vision that was initiated by Paul Braun many years ago that I'm sure many of you know, that he wanted to protect this land and preserve it for wilderness trails and various things like that. So I was concerned about lighting, sound, various other concerns. Hunting, I didn't want to see the land hunted on, so when I took it over, when I gave it to state parks, they posted no hunting signs. I'm not opposed to hunting generally, but I had visions for this land that would basically be more protective of wildlife and of flora. And I'm a sailor at heart. That's what drew me to this lake, and it's one of the few lakes in North Carolina where you can sail and you don't have a lot of noise and a lot of development. So that's one thing I wanted to preserve. So I don't really like a lot of noise on the lake, and this side of the lake is prone to a lot of fishing and a lot of quiet activities, let's say. Now in the course of trying to preserve this for the parks, I proposed to the parks at one point that we dedicate 228 acres, which are this map here. I don't know if I can point this out without ruining things, but, well, I'm just no good with lasers, I guess. But let me just go up here. You can see a dedication line here. So this is all of East Lake 2 up there, and then this is part of East Lake 3. So I was proposing to the state parks that we could make this more affordable by partitioning off this point area that I was concerned about, in particular because that point area is subject to what you can see from the lake. And so I wanted that to be even stricter in terms of its lack of being able to be visible or adequate buffers and so forth. So the state parks wanted a 100-foot buffer, and I was more interested in the bigger buffer than that. So anyway, that was petitioned off. I bought that personally. There's 21.7 acres. There are 2 parcels that I purchased from the LLC. So that left, what is it, 380 minus 22, whatever that number is the balance of the property that's still owned by the LLC. So I was proposing to replace that with some acreage in East Lake 3 so that the people that were donating toward purchase by state parks would still have 228 acres to work with, and that land would be moved over to state parks. For a variety of reasons, that didn't go through, and actually until October 29th of last year, I still thought it would go through and be closed by the end of December of last year. But on October 29th, the state took this project on, it went up to the governor, and they took it off their 2018 agenda. So I'd been working on this since 2016. 2016 it was supposed to be done, 2017, 2018. The parties that I represent in terms of the owners were getting impatient to do something with the land because they have no interest in real estate holdings. They're concerned about what would happen to the land if I pass away and I'm managing the property, and they don't want to have to deal with it. So a lot of things came up, and they were basically wanting to see this land disposed of. And they've been supporting me in terms of my effort to conserve it. But at that point, we had to draw a line and say, well, if it's going to go any further than this, we need some change in terms, because we were holding on to a price that was established almost 2 years earlier by appraisal. So we determined that if it were reappraised, we could still do it. There were other ways we could still do it. The primary way we could do it would be to have a conservation easement on the property, which would protect it from the very thing that you were discussing this evening in terms of moving to low density. There's other ways to move it to low density, and the way that I thought was most effective was by putting a conservation easement on it. Now, the key objectives I think everybody has is to permanently conserve the land protections and lower density, and I would like to see it done by conservation easement. That was my effort right from the start. Congress put in some laws back in the beginning of 2016 to encourage this way to protect land. It's not like it's not existed long before then, but in North Carolina there were tax credits which disappeared, but some of that was replaced by the ability to do things through easement, so that there's still advantages for people that want to donate land to be able to do so and still get a tax advantage. This is one way to do it, and by getting tax advantage, you can then donate more land. So that was my hope, was that by putting an easement on it before rezoning, then it would be possible to donate more land, hopefully to the state parks. But as I say, that didn't go through for reasons not just financial, but also because I learned late in 2017 that they were not willing to restrict the property to the ordinances that Burke County has. I guess I should have realized this sooner, but apparently the state is not subject to any restrictions of the county. Well, the county, in their infinite wisdom, which I really applaud this county for the things that they have put into the ordinances, back in 2004, going back to the reference that Pete brought up, the result of all of that effort was to restrict the use of the property in various ways that protected the environment. And it was my understanding that anybody acquiring this property would need to do that, and I certainly thought that would be true for state parks. But I found out late 2017 that that wasn't true, and that none of these ordinances would apply to state parks. Well, there are a lot of ordinances that I felt were really critical, and I tried to make that a condition of the sale, but in the end, that was not acceptable to state parks. And even to some of the things that were originally proposed, like the lack of a public dock or no RV parks or other things that I had in mind, which I'd already talked to Parks about at the outset. I couldn't even get a letter from Parks and Recreation to say that they would do that. They were willing to preserve it indefinitely for conservation for Parks and Recreation, but they weren't willing to say any more than that in terms of how it would be protected. I felt like that was important. They could even put a highway through it if they wanted to. And so I wanted to preserve that by conservation easement or deed restriction. So that leads us to where we are now, that I've been proposing that we do, instead of rezoning it, that I be allowed to put a conservation easement on the property, which would do the same thing and more. I wouldn't intend to see the lots be more than 3.5 acre average, or more than, let's put it this way, I wouldn't want to see any more lots on this East Lake 2 and 3 than would be allowed. I think it comes to 110 if you take 380 acres and divide it by 3.5. I think this rezoning would say you can't put more than 110 lots there. So we can't have 1,000 lots, but I'm willing to do that by conservation easement instead of by rezoning, and that would permit some of the tax advantages that would enable me to do other things with the property. I think some of the objectives that were stated back in 2004, I went back to the Board of Commissioners notes, and I just did this last week. I should have done it long before then, but believe it or not, there's a lot of wisdom in this board, and I'm glad to see it recorded, that there's several quotes I pulled out of that, but before I get to that, I wanted to say that some of these key objectives, aside from conserving land, is to be able to donate the land for recreational purposes, which I cannot do if without an easement, because without that tax advantage, there won't be enough to get there. That's why one of the reasons we couldn't close with state parks, because of the lack of an easement, there was no tax advantage, in addition to not protecting the land in the way I wanted to see it done. And back in 2004, they had reasons for going to PRMU, and some of that was to allow mixed uses by right. And some of these I'm listing here. Pete will probably correct me. There are probably ways that some of these are by right already. Is that correct, Pete?
That's correct.
So I'm a little puzzled about some of this. I was trying to read through the ordinances and determine what might not be allowed by right. And are there some of these that are not allowed by right, Pete, that already, or that would not be if it were rezoned? Do I have some listed on this slide that would be allowed if it were rezoned?
Yeah, most of those would be allowed if it was rezoned, to be honest. They may be allowed, not as by right, but by conditional use permit.
Right.
Which is just an additional step to getting your permit, going through the conditional use process. But all those uses would be allowed except the retail sales greater than, it should be 3,000 square feet. You've got 300 there. But it would allow retail sales of 3,000 square feet or less, but not more than 3,000 square feet. All the rest of those uses are allowed by either right or by conditional use. And I've got that in the table of uses here. If
Right.
you, I could share that with you at some point.
Sure. Yeah, I recognize that I'm a neophyte with all this because I'm not a developer. I don't really want to be where I am, so bear with me. But when you're talking about having to go through a process to make it that it's conditionally allowed, this leads me back to some of the concerns that were expressed back in 2004, which I thought led to it being zoned PRMU, which is on the next slide here. That some of these are quotes from the 2004 minutes of this board, and some of it has to do with being easier to do things, and that would encourage developers to be able to do things that otherwise they would have to go through some hoops to get it done. Mm-hmm. So maybe conditional use is just a simple thing from this board's perspective. I don't know, but from what I know, it sounds like it is a process that slows it down and might discourage it, but
It's just an extra step. Instead of just coming in and telling us what you want to do, there would have to be a plan to show what you're wanting to do.
all right. So I list here many of the things that were mentioned in the 2004 minutes, like the reason why we are where we are now. The parallel zoning condition in the view of planning staff will result in higher quality development, emphasis on environmental integrity, flexibility of conditions to be placed on rezoning requests that we don't currently have, environmental protection of the lake, option to rezone with specific conditions for development, and Crescent would provide fee simple or easements to the county for purposes of public recreation through use of parks and trail facilities. Now that's specifically what I want to do. The very thing that Crescent wanted to do and has done. I think that's why we have the county park, that some of the things that they have done were because they were able to do it through easements, which had certain advantages. And that's what I've come to recognize, is that if done by easement rather than by rezoning, then there is some advantages. But once it's rezoned to a lower density, then I can't basically take any credit for having done that. If you do an easement, the fact that you've reduced the units from 1,000 to 110 is recognized. I can get an appraisal on a before and an after appraisal, and it will show that there's a difference there, which I would think would be substantial, and the IRS will allow that as a deduction, whatever that difference is, and that deduction then creates a tax advantage which can be used to do other things. And so Another thing that, before I move to the next slide, to tell you what those things are, the zoning ordinances stated that you have to, if you have 50 lots or more, you should apply to rezone to conservation parallel conditional, which is what we currently have. So it strikes me as going backwards to say, well, this is what I'm planning, is to put up 50 lots or more. And I guess now I would be, as immediately after rezoning, encouraged to zone it back the other way. So, I mean, I don't know why we would go to the direction where we came from back in 2004 if we now are closer to the goal. We now have Fauna Flora Trail built, we have a county park next door, and we have all the things that are just begging us to go the next step, which is to put some ecotourism in there, have some mixed use on some of the land that's maybe close to a mile from the lake. So that property could be used for, say, things like bicycle shops or storing boat storage facilities, or maybe a small restaurant, or maybe a general store, things that are basically would encourage tourism, I think, to the lake. So what I'm proposing here on the next, with a conservation easement, here's what I'm willing to do. If the county is willing to hold off on the rezoning and enable me to do this by conservation easement, what I would like to see is to donate a substantial portion of East Lake 2 and 3 to the county. And I'm thinking offhand that might be 100 acres, but without developing a site plan, I can't say exactly how much that land would be. But whatever it would be, it would still not put up more dwellings than the 110 or so that we're talking about. The 3.5 acre would lead to whatever the number that is. I think it's about 110. Part of the easement would be basically to say that we could still have the same number of dwellings, but we wouldn't be able to put 1,000 dwellings up there. I'm willing to construct a road that would help access the park recreation area that the county would use, hopefully, at some point. Maybe not immediately, but I would hope to see the county develop for whatever they want, ball fields, playgrounds, recreational centers, anything that would benefit people that are attracted to that side of the lake. What I would like to do on the lake side is to put up waterfront dwellings, but again, there won't be that many of them. I'm just going to guess 35 or something. This is a 4-mile stretch of waterfront. East Lake 3 might support, I'm guessing, 35 dwellings on the waterfront as I would view it. Maybe another 35 on East Lake 2. So we're not talking about an immense amount of waterfronts, but I think those lots, if I'm guessing accurately, I'm guessing that the property tax on those lots would be in the neighborhood of $5,000 or something per dwelling for waterfront lots, which would be generate about $550,000 a year in tax revenue, in addition to attracting people to that part of the lake, which I think if we did cause people to come to use the county park and the trail, and we had shops that sold hiking gear and did those things, that would attract additional revenue. And I'm not talking about the county doing this. I'm talking about, I would think entrepreneurs would want to build facilities that would support this sort of interest, which I think will develop as soon as the county park's in place. So I think there's a lot of advantages to the county here, and I'm just willing to donate the land basically to make it happen. I don't see the downside to doing that, and I see a lot of upside in that we can get these tax advantages that'll make the donation possible. If it gets rezoned, though, I can't do that. And so that's my bottom line here, is that if it is rezoned, it's basically not going to be possible to go back the other way and go to Uncle Sam and say, will you please write me a check? Yeah, because right now Uncle Sam's sitting there ready to write a check if we downzone it, basically. And I guess another thing that was brought up, I think, by Mr. Taylor was the question in my mind as to, obviously we did buy this property with the expectation that it had these rights on it, and to lose something that has value, I don't mind losing it personally because I intend to donate it, but it's still definitely reducing the value of the property from what we envisioned that it was worth at that time. I do have information, by the way, on the value of the property as is. I think it'll be worth a lot more once it has some waterfront dwellings on it and has some park in there. So I think we definitely can enhance that value, but it's very substantial. So I think I've said everything I came to say, and certainly hope you will consider this. I sent out some information to all of you, since I didn't know about all of the proceedings tonight in terms of what was required. I was kind of late in getting this out, but I hope you will read some of the backup that will support what I've been trying to say, that I sent out to all of the commissioners within the past few days, and you should have in your packet, I think, at this point. Thanks to the help of Kay. Very much appreciate it, and if you will just at least study it, consider it, that's all I'm asking.
All right, gentlemen, you've heard Mr. Zinzau's presentation. Anybody have a question or comment for clarity at this time?
Mr. Chairman, if I might, Mr. Zinzo, you stated on page 2 of your information, item 3, the second paragraph, that the county could accept this property as a donation, which could add to the county park and improve its functionality. Do we have a park next to that? How would that increase our park, county park? Or would this be a totally different park?
No, I see this as being an extension of the county park. You already have the Fauna Flora Trail that goes into East Lake too, and this is the primary area that I would think you would want to add the acreage. And like I'm saying, I don't know what you have already planned for the county park, but I think you could add to it. For instance, some of the, if somebody wanted to put up a boat storage facility, just to take that example, or somebody wants to put up a recreational center and the county didn't want to fund it, let's say, but there might be private individuals that would say, I see a need for this, I can make a business out of this. You can add to what's already available in the adjacent county park. I think that would also draw people that want to put lots up on East Lake too, because that would be a big advantage if you didn't have a boat dock, for instance, but you wanted the boat. You would probably want a place to store your boat. And I don't know if these types of things will be provided on the county park. Maybe some of it's been considered, but maybe some of it can be. But this might be a way to do it without any cost to the county. I would think that if you're doing it on county parkland, the county might have to contribute some of the construction and infrastructure cost. And I'm suggesting that all I'd do is I'd help with providing a road that would jointly access whatever you do on East Lake 2, and also that same road could also provide access to, say, the waterfront lots there. So that's my vision of it. And I may not fully understand what you can already do and whether you need more land or not, but I would think in time, this extra acreage can only be beneficial, I would think.
Okay. This question, Pete, is to you. In the last paragraph, he states, if the land is rezoned, this would not be possible primarily because the rezoning, by making density reduction mandatory rather than optional, removes the ability to generate the tax event. Why would that, is that a true statement? I mean, is that?
I don't know the federal tax law, but from what I gather, if Mr. Zinzo was to put the conservation easement on the property himself voluntarily, there's a certain amount of federal tax credits that could be gained by doing that. I think he believes, and it may be true, I don't know the law, that if the county was to rezone this to conservation, then that may impact those federal tax credits that he may receive, because it wouldn't be a voluntary conservation. It would be something that the county imposed. That's how I understand it.
Right. The way it works, and it's not a credit, it's a deduction, but the way it works is you have an appraiser come in and look at the value of the land now. And if they come in now before it's rezoned and they're going to appraise it, because at the current zoning, they would say you could put 1,000 lots in there. well, not 1,000 on 2 and 3, but 2 per acre would be, I think, 380 times 2, 760 lots. So you could put 760 lots in there the way it's currently zoned. So they would take that as your before appraisal, whatever that appraises out to be, what's the value of tracts that could put up 760 lots. And also the East Lake Development Plan has some value to it as well. So if you remove all that and say now we can only put in 110 lots, I think it's pretty obvious that the value of the property would be worth a lot less. So if that's donated as an easement, then the appraiser would look at the before value and the after value and come up with a, what's the reduction in the value of the land as a result of putting the easement on it. And then that would be a value that you can use as a tax deduction. But you can't do that if you've already reduced it down to 110 lots to start with, and that becomes the before value, and the after value is the same, so you're not going to have any deduction at all.
Okay, on your final page, you gave some things you would do, which are pretty expensive and maybe time consuming. If you could give me an idea of a timetable to accomplish that, what would it be?
Oh,
5
boy.
years? 5 years?
I would hope it would be less than that, but what my objective would be if this were extended would be to, I'd first of all have to transfer the property from the LLC. I'd have to buy it personally from the LLC, borrow money to do that, because it has to be in my name in order to get any value from the conservation easement. The LLC will not create any value for the LLC, but I could do that this year. And I have to wait a year before I get any tax value from it. But that doesn't mean that you can't, in the meantime, be developing the property and going forward with whatever parks and recreation ideas there might be. If Fauna Flora wants to move its trail closer to the lake, or it wants to put tributaries to do access to the lake, I think we could be working on the site plan, which is, my understanding is we'd work on a preliminary site plan. I'm not sure how long that would take. It's conceivable, from what little I know, maybe it could be done this year, because I would hire planners and architects or whoever does these things and work it through the county, or at least, come to a preliminary site plan approval or agreement with the county planners and myself, and determine whether that's viable. I don't know if that can be done as early as this year or not, but moving it from preliminary to final, it would not happen before the end of next year, because I'd need to be holding that property for at least a year before you could actually do something in terms of developing. I don't know. I don't think I could actually sell any lots or anything before the end of next year, but that doesn't mean that the county couldn't use the property or put recreational start doing things. Like I let the state parks do what they wanted for the last 3 years. So there's certainly a way to lease the property. I just did it for $1. I told the state you can use the property and have scout jamborees or anything you want to for 3 years. So certainly there's a lot of things that you could be using the property for, but in terms of finalizing the development, that's probably more up to the county as to how long it would take. But in terms of my putting a road up there to access that parkland, I don't know. That could maybe be done by the end of next year. I don't know. But, you're talking to somebody who's not a developer, so it's hard for me to tell you.
Well, Pete, I like to make a deal that makes most people happy, and this is, to me, this is not an unreasonable request. So I'm going to ask you something, maybe Counselor could answer it. What if we gave him that we zoned everything as you have recommended except his and the other lady who represented hers, but gave him 8 years to do what he suggested, and at the end of 8 years, if it's not done, it reverts back to the zoning that you recommended? Is that a possible, doable deal? He is obviously a generous man and wants to give a lot and help the community a lot, and I, for one, would say we ought to give him that reasonable time to do it.
This is just a thought here. Staff's looking at it from the standpoint of following the ordinance, you know, and there are certain obligations there. The board has 60 days to act on this proposed rezoning. You still would have until next month to actually make a decision on this. Perhaps rather than make that decision tonight on this particular property or the whole rezoning, whatever you choose, maybe take that extra 30 days to consider what he's had to say. Is kind of a lot to take in right here and make a decision. That's an option to maybe not make the decision tonight, to maybe table the vote until the next meeting.
Well, that's an idea of mine. You have 5 commissioners who would also have to agree, and the 8-year could change up and down a little bit if it needed to be, but I just, I think that, if I understand it, his idea wouldn't put any more homes on that land, and you're rezoning, so we're not losing anything, but you're gaining a whole lot by his interest and what he wants to do.
Yeah.
It's
So-
like, I want to give you $100 and you don't want to take it.
I hear what you're saying. I would say maybe if you wanted to study this proposal a little bit before actually deciding something, that'd be acceptable. But one way or another, by next month, there would have to be a decision.
I do think that from my reading of the ordinance, it wasn't a requirement so much as a you may do this, but yeah, I believe the language was not a requisite.
Right. It's the ordinance states that the planning department should make a recommendation to the planning board to rezone it to a general zoning district if the proposed development has not, taken place. And so that's what staff has done. Planning board has acted on that, and now the last step is for the commissioners to entertain that request.
I would also add, I haven't said too much about state parks, but I think there's also always the possibility that we can find a way to get it back to state parks if the county doesn't, see this as something that the county can use. The state parks was always willing and still is willing, as far as I know, to do a conservation easement on it, but the way it was presented to the state parks required a fee simple, and that posed some problems. And so but I would say they'd have to go back to square one, and if that happened, that's not going to happen, for the next 2 years probably before that could be finalized. And I'd say it's a long shot at this point. I'm not going to say that it will happen, but it does open up that crack at least.
Well, I'll make one final comment. I'm a little surprised that with Scott's attitude and personality, that he hadn't recommended that himself, because that's, less than 5% of the land you're dealing with rezoning? 300 acres or less?
Well, the entire rezoning for this section, if I have I think it was 530 some plus acres for this particular rezoning.
Yeah, East Lake 2 is 228 acres, and East Lake 3 is now down to 150 something, I believe. The portion that's still owned by the LLC, that's all I'm really speaking to, is the portion that's owned by the LLC or the 21 acres that I own personally.
All right, thank you, sir. With that, I'm going to ask, is there anyone else here that would like to speak to ZMA 2019-05? Please come forward and state your name and address for me.
My name is Andrew Coda. My address is 951 Bost Road, Morganton. I just have a handful of comments. related to some of the conservation issues in regards to some of this property, specifically East Lake 2, I think is what it's referred to as 228 acres. And I'll try to keep this to 3 minutes or less. Foothills Conservancy, I'm the executive director for Foothills Conservancy of North Carolina. And the Conservancy and State Parks spent about 3 years raising $4.1 million, which comes out to $18,000 an acre to acquire the 228-acre East Lake 2 property. Those funds came from the North Carolina Clean Water Management Trust Fund, the Parks and Recreation Trust Fund, and over $1 million in private contributions and pledges to our nonprofit organization. These funds were in fact available before the end of the year 2018 to acquire the properties to add this land to Lake James State Park. The reason why the project was not taken to the Council of State for approval for the acquisition is because there was not a signed contract. When State Parks acquires land, it is protected under two pieces of state legislation. One of those is the State Nature Preserve Act. I can't remember the other title of the law that when they acquire land to add to state parks, they then dedicate those properties under those two pieces of legislation so that they are conserved. An additional restriction that the North Carolina State Park System was willing to place on this property included a permanent restriction so that it could only be used for public recreation as a public park. And the reason that they were able to go beyond the State Nature Preserve Act and the other piece of legislation is, again, because our organization brought over $1 million, would have brought over $1 million to that acquisition. It wasn't just state money that was going into this acquisition. The reason state parks would not place density and zoning restrictions stronger than the county's development restrictions at the time of the acquisition were twofold. The first was because Parks was not acquiring the land for development. It was acquiring the land for public recreation. And it was willing to place that additional public recreation restriction on the property due to the $1 million+ we were offering to the project. And the second reason was that placing those restrictions on the property prior to acquiring the land would have yielded a lower land value than the state was willing to pay. So that $4.1 million would have been reduced. Again, $18,000 an acre is what we had raised. A couple more points here. Rezoning the property. Reducing the density from a half-acre lot to 3.5-acre lots in no way impedes our ability, a land trust's ability, to restrict the property with a permanent conservation easement. It does nothing. We can replace it regardless of what the zoning, or place a conservation easement on it regardless of what the zoning is. In regards to the appraisal issue that was brought up, an appraisal for a conservation easement is sort of two appraisals in one. The land is valued before the easement is placed on the property, so there are no restrictions. What's the value of the land? That yields a certain highest and best use value for that property. Then the appraiser applies the restrictions that are inside that conservation easement deed, revalues the land based on the rights that are forfeited or taken away, and gives it a lower value because you can't do certain things with the property. So the difference between that before easement value and the land under easement is the value of the conservation easement. That's just a quick background piece of information. A subdivision analysis, so an appraisal based on whether the land can be divided into half-acre lots or 3.5-acre lots, is a major red flag for the IRS. no land trust, especially a nationally accredited land trust like Foothills Conservancy, would ever sign a IRS Form 8283 based on a subdivision analysis of a conservation easement. We rely on appraisals of fair market value appraisals based on raw, undeveloped land, not subdivision analysis. You can do it that way, but we do not do it that way. And many land trusts would never do that. I'm a commissioner on the Land Trust Accreditation Commission. We review land trusts nationwide and determine if they meet the standards of national accreditation, and IRS appraisals are, again, scrutinized heavily. So Foothills Conservancy, as a nationally accredited land trust, again, we tread very lightly on those types. We do it by the book. We do it by the book. So, again, rezoning the property doesn't impede any way or a land trust's ability to protect that property with a conservation easement. I can't speak to whether a conservation easement to IRS standards, and I'm not talking about the appraisal situation, I'm talking about whether the donated value would be acceptable to the IRS, could include as much development as that is being discussed this evening on especially lakefront areas and such. So in other words, we would restrict the property far heavier than that, and that would probably not be allowable. So that area would not be included in a conservation easement of this property. So thank you very much.
Is there anyone else here that would like to speak to the ZMA? State your name and your address.
Martha Whitfield, 1046 Overlook Cove Road, Morganton. I was one of the donors. I'm vice chair of Foothills Conservancy, but I am not speaking from that place. I do support everything Andrew just said. I worked with Susie Hammock Jones for years. I really came to thank you guys for protecting Lake James, which you did in 2003, 2004, when Crescent, all that stuff was going on. Some of you were here then. You have attracted people like my husband and I to come up here, pay large amounts of county tax because we love Lake James and Burke County. We volunteer in the community. He serves on the outreach board here in Morganton. You will find many people at Lake James who have retired there and are giving back to Burke County financially with their time, their energy, and they appreciate Lake James and what you've done there. But I don't want to just speak from people like me who can afford property on the lake. There are a lot of people, and you know them, who come out there, put their boats in at the Linville Access, which is right at the top of this point of the water. They might put in a little skiff. I've seen little skiffs with 4 or 5 people on there with their fishing boat. They like this land right there, this lake right there, because there are no houses on it. It is the only place on Lake James where you can sit out there and look up and see stars, you can see the Milky Way, and the only lights are the Linville boat landing lights. I and my other donors at Lake James and property owners strongly recommend you move to the 3.5 zoning to limit any chance of 0.5 acre dwellings on those lots owned by the LLC. I worked for 4 years for the state parks to take that land over, so they would be permanently protected from any development. And now that that opportunity of the 4.1 million purchase is gone, and my husband and I were we were a big part of that donation part. We were still going to leave our money here. Right now, we're going to put it in the Oak Hill Park at Foothills. But the last thing I want to see is a big development in there with lights. I think the common people of Burke County deserve land at the lake that is not covered up with houses. And with the 3.5 acre lots that Pete Minner and his planning board is proposing, and with the setbacks that you already have in place at Lake James, and the no tree cut and the penalties for cutting trees, you won't see lights even with these 3.5 acre lots. But I wish it was a state park. That's what I wish. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else here that would like to speak to 2019-07? Please come forward and state your name and address.
My name is Todd Bell. I live at 201 Woodland Drive, Morganton, and I'm president of Lake James Environmental Association. And first I'll say what a great place we're in here, where we're talking about two ways to preserve the property. I think that's fantastic. Our board, we've looked at this, and we've looked at it in conjunction with Foothills Conservancy, and I play the odds of risk. And, you know, we're talking about 380 acres, potentially 100 acres being donated to the state, to the county park system. Leaves 280 acres. That could potentially be developed 2 lots per acre. So that gives me about 560 lots. Now, I don't think Lee, as long as Lee is on this planet, that could happen. But the risk I see is that right now we have a bird in hand of potentially 110 lots. If something happened to Lee, all bets could be out the door. So from our board's perspective, you know, we're kind of wanting to go with the bird in hand if we had our ruthers. So I just wanted to make sure that Lake James Environmental Association's position's heard here. And we'd be happy to, I mean, I'm thankful for Lee for preserving the land the way he's doing it, but I'm also thankful to the county for thinking this way. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Else? Is there anyone else here that would like to speak to 2019-07? All right, Madam Clerk. We do have one more. Please come forward and state your name and address, please.
Hi there, I'm Jerry Dean Beck Jr. I go by Dean. I am a lifelong resident of Lake James, and we're probably the largest private landowner in this subdivision. We own 2 lots for 2 tracts, the large one up there, L-shaped, and the short one. I'm going to speak for myself, but also for the residents of Lake James. We have a lot going on here. Seems a little bit of confusion as to the direction we should go. I see no problem with slowing down. Let's take a breath, breathe, make sure we're doing the right thing for this lake. Lee's got a lot going on. As far as the 3 acres, I'm probably for it. I don't want to see a crammed-in development on this lake, an eyesore. My only request is let's slow down. We can take 60 days, we can take 30 days, breathe on this, make sure we're doing the right thing, let's do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beck. Is there anyone else that would like to speak to 2019-07? All right, Madam Clerk, seeing and hearing no one else, I am going to close the public hearing. At this time, I'm going to recognize the Vice Chair.
Mr. Chairman, at this point, we've received so much new information in the last 72 hours and even today. I think it'd be prudent to wait to make a decision. So I move we postpone this zoning amendment to our next regularly scheduled meeting.
All right, gentlemen, you've heard the motion before you to postpone our decision on this matter until our next scheduled meeting. Wayne?
Is that going to give us enough time to study this issue, or would it be prudent to have a special meeting? I mean, there's a lot to digest here tonight, that new things that we've heard and whatever. Can we just do that?
My desire is for us to have a special meeting in between. With the new information that we received today, that's the reason I wanted to postpone it until the next meeting and then go ahead and call one in between. I think it'll give us time in between, but we heard a lot of information tonight, and I think we need to absorb that, and I do think we need to slow down a little bit.
Good, thank you, Johnny.
Make sure that we do make the right decision.
Thank you.
All right. You heard the motion before you. All in favor of postponing this until the next scheduled meeting, signify by raising of the right hand. Madam Clerk, that will be 5-0. Let me say thank you to everyone that spoke tonight. Your commission is here to work for you. We do want to slow down. We do want to absorb this information. It's a lot of information to absorb, and we will arrive at some decision, I'm sure. So we'll be working together to try to arrive at that decision. So thank you very much. All right, gentlemen, moving on to item number 2 on our list is zoning map amendment ZMA 2019-06 and public hearing, presented by Peter Miller, Planning and Zoning. Peter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This rezoning request is somewhat similar to the previous request. It also involves land that is close to the Lake James. It also involves one large tract that was approved at that same 2004-2005 timeframe by Crescent Resources under a conditional district rezoning and a conditional development plan. That parcel is one which is owned now by the state of North Carolina. It's approximately 1,335 acres, if I recall correctly. But that's just one of the parcels that we're speaking about here today. Because there's so many parcels involved in so much land, I've kind of broken this one rezoning into Part A and B. And what we're looking at here is a request to rezone this property, which is PRMU, here outlined in the purplish color, to the both the conservation district low density for the larger parcels of land, and then the R1 zoning district, which you see just to the bottom of the screen. That brownish color is already existing R1, and so the smaller parcels is proposed to be rezoned to the R1 zoning to be compatible with that existing R1 around it. Now, if you remember from the opening statement, and also Mrs. Reed that spoke earlier, her one parcel, 25.54 acres, which I better not mess with that pointer, but her 25.54 acre parcel is part of this rezoning right here. Thank you for that. And she has requested, and staff is in agreement with amending the original request to rezone that particular parcel to the low density conservation district where it had been originally recommended for the R1. It's 25 acres. It's larger than most of those smaller parcels which were proposed for rezoning, R1 rezoning anyway. So what you see here is a conservation district low density for those larger parcels, and they're broken down in the table that I've provided to you by the original zoning district and proposed zoning district. So simply put, this portion of the rezoning is to rezone these parcels here to a mixture of low density conservation and R1 zoning. Now, if we move into the second part of this rezoning, B, you'll see the large parcel there, which, as I mentioned, is owned by the state of North Carolina. It's just over 1,300 acres, and there's also some other parcels as well. The larger of the parcel to the lower right, which is outlined in the purplish color. That's owned by Duke Energy. Those real small parcels, which are kind of outliers there, those are also included in this rezoning as well as the other sliver right there. Those are currently zoned R3 residential, and we're proposing those to be brought in and rezoned to the low-density conservation district, as well as the other parcels also shown in the outline, so that they would also be compatible with the low-density conservation, which is both to the north and south of those parcels. And then if the previous rezoning request is approved, I think we have a slide that shows what this is current zoning here. This is how the proposed zoning would look for these particular parcels in this rezoning 2019-06. And there may be a slide, maybe not, which you see the parcels in that bluish color there. That was the previous rezoning. Those would also be the low-density conservation district. That greenish color would encompass those parcels as well. So again, this was originally done back in the early 2000s. Crescent Communities owned a majority of the land, not all of it, some of the parcels to the right of NC 126. I guess that would be northeast of NC 126. Those are privately owned, and those parcels, we feel, if we're going to rezone these other two, the conservation district, that we should also bring those in as well, so that the area will be compatible. And essentially, for the most part, what this rezoning would do is do away with that conditional development plan that was adopted back in 2004, and it would bring this into a general zoning district, which would change the density to the overall 3.5 acre per dwelling or lot status. And for the R1 properties there, those would still be based upon the availability of public water versus private wells and public sewer versus on-site septic tanks. So those lot acreages can vary between 0.58 and 0.69 acres. So because of the size that they already exist, we felt that was appropriate. And again, the Reed property would be changed to the low-density conservation. We didn't have time to update this map here. So that pretty much concludes my report on this rezoning. Just keep in mind that this A and B make up just this one rezoning here, 2019-06.
Thank you, Pete. Questions for Peter? Hearing none, at this time I'll open the public hearing. Madam Clerk, is there anyone here to speak to ZMA 2019-06? Hearing and seeing one, Madam Clerk, I will close the public hearing. It's the pleasure of the board on this matter.
Mr. Chairman, I move to adopt an ordinance 2019. I believe, Madam Clerk, that should be 06. -08. Am I seeing something wrong here?
That's a case number. Oh, sorry. Case number and ordinance numbers are not the same.
Okay.
Sorry.
I'm getting there.
Yes, sir.
Maybe. Go here. Oh, 08, right? Okay. Adopt an ordinance 2019-08, amending the Burke County zoning map and related consistency statement. Statement of consistency, ZMA 2019-06. The proposed rezoning would be consistent with the 2016-2030 Burke County Strategic Land Use Plan and considered reasonable and in the public interest because the proposed rezoning is consistent with the Section 9A13 of the zoning ordinance, as it requires the county to rezone parcels to an appropriate general zoning district when progress has not been made toward developing the parcels in accordance with the current approved conditional zoning district and plan. The proposed rezoning would enact more stringent water quality standards for parcels with frontage on Lake James. The proposed rezoning would reduce the density of development. This, in turn, would increase protection of the natural scenic beauty of the Lake James area.
All right, gentlemen, you've heard Commissioner Britton's motion. All in favor signify by raising of the right hand. Madam Clerk, that is unanimous, 5-0. Thank you, Peter. All right, gentlemen, we'll move on to item number 8, informal public comments. Madam Clerk, anybody signed up?
Not that has already spoken.
Is there anybody here that wants to speak again in informal public comments? If you'll come forward, let me remind you that informal public comments stay as close to 3 minutes as we can.
Andrew Coda, 951 Boston Road, Morganton. This is a comment of thanks. On the Commissioner's consent agenda this evening is a resolution of support for Foothills Conservancy's Oak Hill Community Park and Forest project, a project that our land trust is raising $3.1 million to acquire 660 acres in the Oak Hill community for a future public park and forest. On behalf of Foothills Conservancy, I just want to thank the county and the commissioners for supporting our efforts to acquire this land, and hopefully one day we look forward to a close partnership to open this up for public recreation and public use. And I have a short note that I'd like to read from Bob Benner, who is a founding board member of Foothills Conservancy and a longtime advocate for outdoor recreation in Burke County and other counties around us. Bob writes, I have asked Andrew to speak on my behalf since I have ALS and my speech is not easily understood. I wish to commend the Board of Commissioners for their foresight in supporting Scott Carpenter's outstanding trails program in the county and beyond. I have lived in Burke County going on 50 years and I'm nearing 90 years of age. I am very energized by your actions. I have been an advocate of trails, both foot and water, as well as land preservation. I've worked on establishing state parks on lands around them in the county and statewide. We are so fortunate in having had Foothills Conservancy working with us in the county and surrounding counties for over 20 years. They now present us with a rare opportunity in purchasing the Oak Hill Tract, an opportunity that very few communities get. Others have so eloquently written in detail about the values of obtaining this property, so I will not delve into that. I would like to request a resolution from this body in support of this action. If this can be done, it will be both an economic and recreational asset to the citizens of this county for many years to come, and I guarantee that the citizens of Burke County will recognize you for your insight into their future, and you will make this grumpy old man very happy as well. Bob Benner. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else, Madam Clerk? All right. Okay, let's move on to our consent agenda. This time we'll ask Brian Steen, our county manager, to review our consent agenda. Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the board, you have 11 items on your consent agenda. Number 1, clerk, appointments to Burke Senior Center Advisory Board. Number 2, clerk, reappointment and removals from the Parks and Recreation Commission. Item 3, clerk resolution amending the 2019 meeting schedule. Item 4, community development, support of Foothills Conservancy purchase of Oak Hill Park. Item 5, DSS, annual memorandum of understanding between North Carolina Division of Health and Human Services in Burke County. Item 6, general services, Labella Associates annual service fiscal year 2019-2020. Item 7, sheriff resolution donating surplus radios to Glen Alpine Police Department. Item 8, tax department, the tax collection report for July 2019. Item 9, tax department release refund report for July 2019. Item 10, tax department collections annual settlement report for 2018/2019. And item 11, tax department order to collect taxes for 2019. That concludes your consent agenda.
All right, gentlemen, you've heard Brown's report. At this time, we'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
All right, you've heard Commissioner Avery's motion. All in favor signify by raising of the right hand. That'll be 5-0. Madam Clerk, unanimous. Moving on to our items for decision. Our first item up for decision tonight is appointment to the Animal Advisory Board. Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. This is a request to appoint someone to the Animal Advisory Board for seat number 7, which is now an at-large pet owner seat, to complete an unexpired term ending July 31st, 2020. You have the following citizens have applied: Gwen Hood, Tony Powers, David Coffin, Donald Probst, Carla Wallace, and Megan Bradley.
All right, gentlemen, you see all those that have put in applications. At this time, I will open the floor for nominations.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to nominate Tony Powers to that board.
All right, are there any other nominations?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to nominate David Coffin for that position.
All right, are there any other nominations?
Mr. Chairman, I do not have a nomination, but we have so many good, qualified candidates, so to speak. I think it'd be better if we just enlarge the number of people that serve on the board. I do want to think, we had 6, and looking at all the qualifications, and this just depends on which process you use in evaluation, but most of them got 2 stars, so that's pretty high. So, but anyhow, I appreciate them, their willingness to serve, and any of them would have been fine with me.
All right, thank you, sir, for those comments. Are there any other nominations? All right, hearing none, I will close the floor for nominations, and we'll vote on the nominees in the order they were nominated. So the first nominee was Tony Power. All of those in favor of Tony Power, please signify by raising of the right hand. Okay, that would be 2. The second nominee was David Coffin. All in favor of David Coffin, please signify by raising of the right hand.
You can vote twice.
Sure. All right, that was David Coffin with 3 and Tony Power with 2. At this time, I will entertain a motion to appoint Mr. Coffin, who received the most votes.
So moved.
All right, we have a motion to appoint David Coffin to the Animal Advisory Board, seat number 7, to complete an unexpired term ending July the 31st of 2020. All in favor signify by raising of the right hands. Madam Clerk, that will be 5-0. So, Mr. Coffin, if you are here, congratulations to you. All right, moving. You're welcome, sir. All right, moving on to item number 2 from Community Development, our county park restroom contract that will be presented by Shane Prisby, Community Development Operations Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. The Community Development Department bid out the County Park Restroom Project and received 3 bids. All 3 bids were close in total, but varied widely on the 4 individual bid items. The lowest bid will put the project over budget by a total of $26,981.48. The prefabricated restroom had already been ordered, and the delivery date is set for the week of September 23rd. The site prep must be completed by this date. After discussing this issue with the county manager and the county finance director, it was decided to narrow the scope of the project and rebid it in attempt to bring it in line with our existing budget for the project. The results of the 3 bids came in. Bennett Grading and Excavation, $62,595. Triangle Contractors Incorporated, $42,895. And BPM Construction as the apparent low bidder with $40,570. With these bids and the apparent low bidder coming in at $40,570, it still puts the project over budget by $15,981.48. Community Development has 2 other parking projects to be completed in this fiscal year. The department is recommending that the bid be accepted and requesting that the commissioners make the appropriation of $16,000 to the project contingent on any savings that can be realized on the other 2 parking area projects.
Thank you, Shane. Questions for Shane on this matter?
Mr. Chairman, I do have a question. Shane, how far is that restroom from where the parking area is, as you see up there?
My estimation, based off of GIS, is about 250 feet.
250 feet.
Correct.
I'm going to ask a question I should have asked a long time ago, but I just would like to know, okay? Why didn't we build it up there where the parking area is, and we probably would have saved a bunch of money?
The answer to that, Commissioner, is that the future, one of the 2 projects that we have is an extension of the existing parking area, which is already beyond capacity most weekends, especially nice ones. So the large open area that you can see adjacent to NC 126 is the best available area to extend parking and also include access for buses, which I'm working with the General Service Director, Miles Champion, on to find a way to accommodate all of that and the increasing use that the parking lot has been seeing.
Well, it's too late to change, but I just wondered what the amount of money would be saved and the more convenience it would have been up at the parking lot. But anyhow, that's irrelevant, so thank you anyhow.
Other questions or comments? Hearing none, what's the pleasure of the board on this matter?
Mr. Chairman, I move to conditionally approve the additional appropriation of $16,000 from the general fund for the Fauna Flora County Park restroom project if the overage cannot be offset from the parking area projects.
All right, gentlemen, you've heard the vice chair's motion. All in favor signify by raising of the right hands. Madam Clerk, that will be 5-0. Thank you so much, Shane.
Mr.
Appreciate that.
Chairman,
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
probably ought to have a vote to approve the low bid and award the contract. That we approved taking money out of our fund balance, but we probably ought to award them the contract as well as part of this.
All right, gentlemen, at the suggestion of our learned barrister, we'll entertain a motion for what he just said.
So moved, Mr.
To
Chairman.
approve BPM, I'm sorry.
To approve
Mr. Chairman, I
BPM
make a
construction.
motion that we approve the low bidder of the contract.
That is
BPM Construction.
BPM Construction for the amount of $40,570.
All right, gentlemen, you heard Commissioner Taylor's motion. All in favor signify by raising the right hands. That'd be 5-0. Madam Clerk, thank you, Mr. County Attorney. Keep us straight.
Thank you very much.
All right, that moves us into our last section of reports and comments. Let's start over there with our attorney.
Nothing from me tonight, Mr. Chairman.
We're moving fast here.
Mr. Chairman, in addition to the regular meetings and minutes that you received from each of the commissioners, I did want to report that I attended Valdez Festival and worked the booth Saturday, and also attended Friday night at the Drexel Fair. Barely made it last night to the celebration of the new employees, welcoming the employees to the animal shelter, and I appreciate that. And just very quickly, the Clean Air and Clean Water Convention was a huge success, and total registration was about 80 people for the water quality conference, 65 for the air quality conference. Combined, it was about 40 more than it was last year. And if you recall earlier, we announced we were moving it up a month because we were in the start to school month in September. And they were, the staff at Western Piedmont Council of Government are very excited and pleased with the turnout of that. So for the people from Byrd County who attended, I'd like to say thank you.
I'll move to the vice chair.
Mr. Chairman, you have this in your packet, but we've got an update from Ed Phillips about the 2018 visitor impact for Burke County. As many of you that don't have this report in front of you, actually, county spending by domestic visitors increased 5.8% to $107 million. So fantastic things going on there. And for our animal advocate friends out there, I just want to remind you that our association, the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners, meets this week, so we won't be at that meeting Thursday night. And so just want y'all to be aware of that.
Commissioner Britton?
None, sir.
Madam Clerk?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just would like to remind folks to come out to the public input session for the new Animal Services Center that will be at the Foothills Higher Education Center on Thursday from 6 to 8 p.m. And that is the lower entrance of the facility. Thank you.
All right, Mr. County Manager?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, and to our public. We have brought on our team for animal services. It has been a beehive of activity at the facility, the shelter, or the Animal Services Center now. And they may be bringing some of our furry friends to visit commissioner meetings and see, is this wolf for you? And they have made a little change in our tagline of being all about advancing to being all about adoption. So if we can, let's adopt. And if we have pets, please spay and neuter if possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. County Manager. I know we have been here a long time, but please indulge me. I think this is very important. I received an email this past week that said, and please allow me to read it, it won't take me but a minute or two. I wasn't sure who to contact with this feedback, so I reached out to you, hoping that it would get to the proper people. Unfortunately, I had to call 911 while hiking at the Linville Gorge yesterday. I would like to provide you with just a little bit of feedback by way of background. My son and I planned a trip to the gorge before he heads off to college next week. This was our first time in the area. I did a fair amount of planning en route for the supplies, etc. Unfortunately, I underestimated the challenge of the terrain, the heat, and the distance to water resources. We started at the Wolf Pit Trailhead with the intention of hiking north to the Chimneys, then to Table Rock, then to Spence Ridge Trail, down to the river, and doing that all in one day. Camping on the other side, camping on the other side of the gorge and hiking down to the river, way back to Wolf Pit the next day. In hindsight, this was too ambitious. After lunch at the Chimney Gap, we started to climb up the chimneys. Near the top of the climb, I experienced extreme cramping and couldn't continue. We were also running low on water, which I thought was enough to get us to the river. I literally couldn't continue. That's when we decided we better call 911. My son did all the communications as I was on the ground suffering cramps and nausea. I could overhear the conversations and knew that the staff he was talking to was courteous and helpful. Approximately 2 hours later, Chad was the first to arrive on the scene. After driving out and back to our car, I fully appreciate how long it can take to get to people in this area. Chad immediately assessed the situation and started an IV on me because I was in bad shape. He made us feel as comfortable and safe as he could. Then Wes and Allie arrived, who were very friendly. After 2 bags of IVs, we started to walk out, headed to the Table Rock parking lot. Along the way, we met up with several people from the team, Brian, Ryan, and others who helped carry my pack and me and encouraged us all along the way. Chad and the team constantly monitored my situation and called for breaks as we made our way back. After reaching the parking lot, I was checked by Kim, who was there in an ambulance. Then the team offered to take us back to our car at Wolf Pit Road. Cecil was kind enough to take us on this long ride and was very friendly along the way. Chairman Carswell, I wanted to express my sincere and deep appreciation for your 911 service and the way the entire team conducted themselves. Given the beauty of your area, I am sure you receive a high volume of visitors from time to time that may need some assistance like me. Your community is fortunate to have such a great team in place when called upon. And that was from Brad Hayes. Ladies and gentlemen, we just can't say enough about our folks. Every team that we have, every team that has been assembled since our county manager has arrived here, the work that they do is just commendable, and we can't say enough about that. So I just wanted to read that and get that in the record. Tomorrow, we'll have a Broughton Hospital ribbon cutting from 10 a.m. Unfortunately, that is not, I understand, after some confusion, is not open to the public. So some of our commissioners will be there. Some of us will be on our way to Greensboro to the NCACC conference, which will be held starting tomorrow through Saturday of this week, the 24th. Our Animal Services Center on Kirksey Drive will be closed for repairs from August the 26th through September the 2nd. And our county offices will be closed on September 2nd in observance of Labor Day. As Brian said, please remember to have your pet spayed or neutered, and please, if you would, on behalf of the chairman, pick up one piece of trash off of the highways in Burke County. Let's try to make our county a little bit cleaner. Is there anything besides the vacancy reports I need to go over at this time, Madam Clerk? All right, if you'll hit those for me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have the following opportunities for citizens to be involved in county government: the Hickory Regional Planning Commission, the Adult Care and Nursing Home Community Advisory Committees, Council on Aging, the Juvenile Crime Prevention Council, City of Morganton Board of Adjustment and Planning Board for the ETJ, Voluntary Agriculture Board, the Burke County Board of Adjustment and Planning Boards, Western Piedmont Regional Transit Authority Transportation Advisory Board, Partners Behavioral Health Management. We just filled our Animal Advisory Board seat, the Burke Senior Center Advisory Council, and the Recreation Commission.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. With the action that we've taken tonight, we will not adjourn. There's no need for a closed session. We will stand in recess until September the 3rd. Of 2019 at 4 p.m. and in the interim, I will make notice of probably a special call meeting. For some of us, we want to retire to the back room because somebody's 61 years old. I can't tell you who it is, but we're going to go back and have a little birthday cake. With that in mind, we stand in recess until September the 3rd. Thank you, gentlemen and ma'am.